As with all subjects that we're discussing in this class, it's not all bad news. It's not always bad and working worse, and there's no improvement, no light at the end of the tunnel. I know this has come up with nutrition support and development programs that we have already talked about and we'll be talking about more. Progress is being made. There is development being achieved, good, solid, sustainable development. And much of the reason for this has got to do with the fact that in many countries, they have been able to bring corruption under control. While it may not be completely eradicated, at least it's being recognized for what it is, and there are measures taken to minimize the effect that it has in the country. This graph gives you an idea over a number of years of how corruption over time has evolved. Finland at the bottom, low corruption, then, now, in the future, always. Poland, coming out of the former Soviet Union time and the Iron Curtain, little more corrupt and now less so, but at least consistently corrupt at that lower level. El Salvador, coming out of a civil war, much more highly corrupt previous then, and this has improved over the years. Russia, independent Russia, coming out of the former Soviet Union, started off a little less corrupt and then has become more so. Indonesia has taken a dip. Again, this is just a representative example from a few countries. But it's important to understand that what I'm trying to explain is not a static process. All the various terms and conditions that I've talked about that you need to be looking at with corrupt societies, of how to work within them. You have to look at how these various measures have taken hold and how they've worked. And another reason why I spent this level of this amount of time and devoted this level of detail to the subject as well is because some of you may well have an interest down the road in your life, in your career, to be in the third world, to make a difference, to be an aid worker. And it's very easy to be discouraged. And if you're simply going to take a black and white view of this subject, you're going to stay in bed. You'll be stuck in bed all day because you will not feel at least a bit motivated to get up and get out there and do it. It's not that you accept the corruption, and you've seen how pervasive and institutionalized it can be. It's a monumental task. But you rise to the occasion. You provide the leadership. You use the authority and the role of advocacy which you have in a society. In our case, as aid workers working with governments, you can make a tremendous difference. And there are many countries that have been able to make that difference and make those changes, and all of their population in the end benefits. So, measures of corruption. When you look at how in the world today we try to decide, well, okay, it's easy just to lump all these countries together and say, well, they're all corrupt and it's a waste of time, whatever. There is an organization which I have a lot of respect for, based in Berlin, called Transparency International. And they publish every year something called the CPI. And this is, for them, the Corruption Perceptions Index. And they have a whole series of indicators, many of which I've just gone over in this lecture, of rule of law, regulatory burden, all these kinds of indicators. And they put them all together and then rank these countries on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the most corrupt and 10 being the least corrupt. Now, I was in Bangladesh, which is at the bottom there, and the rank of 102, for 3 years in a row. And each year, Bangladesh, the years that I was there, came out number 1 on the CPI list. Now, this is like a bit like the Academy Awards, but it's not, of course, but a lot of people follow it if you're in this line of business. And so there's a lot of build up to it that Transparency International is about to issue their annual report, and they're going to have their ranking. And so a lot of countries who care about this, some of them who pretend they don't care but really do care, it matters a lot. You know, what is the investment climate seen? How is it perceived in their country? You know, they really kind of do care how countries perceive them, and whether they are a country that could be invested in, and that they will, companies will have a good return on their investment and such. So in Bangladesh, 3 years running, it would be the front page news in the morning. On the way to work, one of my colleagues would hand me the paper yet again, number one, and this is the local press in Bangladesh, local newspaper in local language that would state, once again, Transparency International declares us the most corrupt country. Oh, government hated it, but civil society, many aspects of civil society were encouraged by it on many levels. Think about it. One is simply that the newspapers could publish that information in local language. It wasn't just the English language press that the expats would read, but that this is something that would be broadcast in the radio. Hugely embarrassing to the government. Now that's a good thing for civil society. That's a good thing for the country. Now, many of the ministers and senior politicians I would meet during the course of that day and the next few weeks after this had come out were not terribly happy. But then again, that gave us a bit of ammunition to use. Well, unfortunately, once again, you're number one. Not a good sign. And often what we would find is government officials would then volunteer to us what measures that they're taking to improve, to hopefully the next year not be number one. No one wants to be number one. They don't want to be in the top 10 list. And this is a map then with a more graphic presentation that Transparency International does of how they applied the CPI around the world. And the lighter colors are the least corrupt, and the darker colors clearly are the most corrupt. And you can see some of the countries I just talked about, Bangladesh being here, right there, yeah. And then, well, some of the other countries, I don't need to name them. But again, you can see the correlation between being some of the poorest countries in the world, the more middle-income countries in the first world. And it's not for a minute to say that there's no corruption in the first world, and that's not the purpose of this class, but it's also not the intention of this map either. So there is a degree, but to nowhere near to the same extent as you find in some of the poorest countries in the world.